You are listening to Insights from the Conference Board.
Hello, my name is Robin Erickson, and I'm a principal researcher in the Human Capital Center at the Conference Board. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Insights, podcast series brought to you by the Conference Board. As you know, businesses are struggling during this extremely volatile period during the COVID-19 pandemic. In response to the current economic conditions, many organizations have started various cost-cutting measures, and layoffs are often one of the first things that organizations do. The Conference Board recently published 2 short reports on COVID-19 and layoffs. One is titled Finding Innovative Alternatives to Layoffs, in which we offer a handful of cost-saving alternative measures to help organizations avoid having to lay off employees. The other report is called Conducting Compassionate Layoffs, for organizations in survival mode where they have to do that. We also provide a list of actions to help them conduct compassionate layoffs when it's absolutely necessary. Both reports are available to the public on the Human Capital Resources page of the Conference Board's COVID-19 Hub at www.conference-board.org. Today, my co-author of these reports, Amy Yee, human capital researcher, is joining me to discuss the various strategies listed in the reports. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks for having me, Robin. I'm very excited to be here. So indeed, especially in the industries hit hard by COVID-19, such as airlines, hospitality, and retail, we've seen that many companies have recently announced either layoffs or furloughs. So Robin, I know you've done extensive research in layoffs, retention, and the attrition of downsizing survivors specifically. So what do you consider to be the most important or unique finding that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Thanks, Amy. And yes, I've actually been studying layoffs, engagement, and retention of downsizing survivors for 18 years, since shortly after 9/11. In fact, in 2007, my PhD dissertation focused on the retention of downsizing survivors. After the 2008 Great Recession, I wrote about how organizations were managing talent in a turbulent economy and about the significant cost of turnover, both voluntary or involuntary. Most organizations downsize in order to try to increase performance, profitability, and/or competitiveness. And as we mentioned, it's one of the first cost-saving measures that's taken. And while layoffs can relieve financial burdens temporarily, however, they can't, or they also affect organizations negatively in many ways, some of which can be profound and lasting. One critical finding that might be less intuitive for many is that layoffs do increase profitability in the short term, but they generally don't increase financial performance or stock price of the company beyond 1 to 2 quarters. In addition, layoffs often result in other negative outcomes, such as loss of critical skills, productivity, and innovation, lowered employee morale, and significant brand reputational risks. And then, as jobs are the critical factor in consumer confidence and essential for an economic recovery, organizations that have laid off employees will have a harder time rebounding as they try to rehire employees once we start to recover from the global pandemic of COVID-19.
Wow, very interesting and helpful findings, Robin. Thanks so much for sharing. I didn't know that layoffs didn't really increase financial performance beyond 1 or 2 quarters. So these are probably some of the major reasons why CEOs of so many companies we've seen that have taken a stand and committed to not doing layoffs during the pandemic. In our research, we suggest that organizations that are facing financial challenges look at layoffs only as their last resort. Instead, they should consider alternative strategies before downsizing. One of the very first steps that we suggest organizations take is to conduct scenario planning. This actually should have been done in the past few weeks, but if your organization hasn't yet done any scenario planning work, we strongly recommend that you do it now. We've started seeing that COVID-19 curves flattening in different cities and states, and we start talking about reopening. So all of this is great news. But it might still take some time for this global economic freefall to end completely, and I think the future is not yet predictable. So in this situation, companies should really develop different scenarios to help inform both short-term and long-term workforce plans. So our colleagues on the economics team at the conference board have developed different economic scenarios for organizations to reference. If you are interested, feel free to check them out from our website. And also, I think in most companies that we've heard from, at each functional area, business unit, or regional country unit is likely to be affected slightly different by the pandemic. So organizations should really gather leaders from different areas of the organization to discuss and assess on a regular basis, and also really take an enterprise-wide view to handle the scenario planning work. So Robin, do you want to share some of the most common alternatives to layoffs first?
Sure. Thanks, Amy. The first one that we recommend is, if you haven't already done this, but that is to reduce all non-essential costs. And so what does that mean? It means that organizations should identify all the possible ways to eliminate or suspend discretionary expenses, including canceling non-essential travel, moving in-person training to online formats, reducing company investments, renegotiating contracts with vendors, and so on. For example, cost-cutting suggestions for hospitality include temporarily closing unused parts of hotels, reducing energy expenditures, and/or converting hotels into overflow hospitals. Another alternative to layoffs is to consider alternative sources of worker pay. For example, governments across the world are beginning to bail out those sectors that have been hit hardest by COVID-19. For example, the airlines and hospitality sectors. In the U.S., the recently passed CARES government stimulus bill provides an available pool of funds totaling $500 billion for corporations and nearly $350 billion for small businesses with fewer than 500 employees. Part of these loans will be forgiven if employers don't conduct layoffs for at least 8 weeks after the loans are approved. Another thing that most companies are doing is to freeze non-essential hiring. It's very common for organizations to stop hiring for non-essential positions during economic downturns. And in preparation for the harsh economic impacts of COVID-19, a vast majority of companies have decided to freeze hiring across the entire company. Another alternative is it's more painful. It's to defer merit pay raises, promotions, and future discretionary compensation. So that means postponing merit-based salary increases and promotions. It means that you can also defer pay increases to drive down future people costs. And those would be bonuses and commissions and benefits such as retirement matches. But there's also some other things they can do from the compensation perspective. Amy, why don't you share some of those ideas?
Sure. Yeah, so a number of organizations that already encourage employees who cannot work from home to use their personal time off benefits, such as vacation or sick days for their absence, as a way of avoiding or at least delaying furloughs or layoffs. So I also worked with one of my other colleagues on a short piece on COVID-19 and compensation benefits. So I've heard that some companies allow employees to borrow a few PTO days from 2021 in case they need additional time. Some companies have also launched a PTO donation program, which enables employees to donate their vacation days to their colleagues who might have exhausted their PTOs. Another alternative approach related to compensation is to reduce pay temporarily. So we've seen that some organizations have implemented temporary base pay reduction for all of their employees, either by cutting salary or shortening work weeks. Often we've seen that pay cuts for executives are more aggressive than for others. In the news, we've seen that multiple CEOs from severely affected sectors have decided to forgo their salary for the rest of 2020. We think that executives should really lead by example by lowering their compensation before reducing employee pay. And as the economy gets better, if possible, assure employees that they will receive their lost pay within a certain time frame. For example, General Motors announced a temporary 20% pay cut for salary workers a few weeks ago, but they also promised to repay the affected employees in a lump sum with interest around the same time next year.
We've also heard that some companies are embracing job sharing, and because they allow employees to cut their work hours, rather than having to lay off employees. Short-term work sharing programs are well targeted for temporary economic disruptions. For example, at a multinational energy company, many employees suggested implementing job sharing across all the plants to share the pain equally. Another potential way to avoid layoffs is to encourage voluntary leave or early retirement. Voluntary leave programs help alleviate financial programs immediately. In just a few days after the decrease in airline travel, Delta received over 10,000 employee petitions to voluntarily take unpaid temporary leave. And another example is a global manufacturer has implemented a voluntary reduced work schedule through an existing transitional work arrangement program. And yet another company is encouraging voluntary 1 to 3 month sabbaticals without pay, but where health benefits are covered. And speaking of health benefits, there is another option, which is also difficult, but that's to consider short furloughs that pay benefits. So organizations that need to close temporarily should consider implementing short furloughs where they continue to pay benefits for their workers. And that way they're positioned for a quicker restart when the upswing begins, especially in sectors where it has been hard to find employees. Companies should also provide information to any worker that's being furloughed. They should provide them information about unemployment because they may not realize that they're eligible on a furlough for unemployment.
Definitely, I think most people probably are not familiar with such information, so it'd be really helpful if organizations can provide it. So what Bob and I just shared are some common layoff alternatives we've seen since the outbreak of the pandemic. But I'm sure that there are a lot more innovative approaches out there that Rob and I are not aware of. I think the key is really to be creative. For example, organizations can ask their own employees what other measures could be taken to help prevent layoffs and reduce costs. We think that crowdsourcing can not only help an organization identify alternative solutions to layoff in this case, but also tells employees that their company is willing to listen to their suggestions, which serves a good way of building the trust between the employer and the employees.
Yes, and that trust is so important, especially during a time of crisis. We would love to hear from all of our listeners if your organization has gotten creative and been able to avoid layoffs. Please reach out to me by email to tell me what you've done, and my email address will be posted in the description of the podcast. At this point in our program, we're going to take a short break for some quick announcements and be back in just a minute to continue discussing the latest insights on layoffs and COVID-19.
Can you, your team, or your company benefit from insights such as the ones provided in this podcast? They are immediately available when you join the Conference Board, a membership-based think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. Reaching across industries and geographies, we bring together our noted experts, senior executives from the world's largest companies, and nonpartisan practical research to help you address your most important business issues. Our membership packages are tailored to your organization's unique needs and budget. To learn more about our offerings, go to www.conferenceboard.org and click Join on the top bar to connect with one of our product specialists.
Hello again. I'm Robin Erickson with the Conference Board. Welcome to the second half of our podcast, and thanks for joining my colleague Amy and me as we discuss the important topic of layoffs, especially during this global pandemic. Although many organizations have decided to keep all of their employees in the short term, the longer the COVID-19 crisis lasts, the more companies in survival mode will feel compelled to make the tough call and have to implement layoffs. And in the U.S. alone, nearly 22 million people filed unemployment insurance claims in the past month. That was just ending April 11th. So there's been even more since then. To make layoffs less painful and damaging in both the short term and the long term, the Conference Board suggests that employers take specific actions to conduct their layoffs more compassionately. I think this is really important So Amy, why don't you share a few strategies first?
Sounds good. Yeah, I think before conducting layoffs, there are a few things that need to be done. I think the first is to leverage strategic workforce planning. So strategic workforce planning plays an important role in determining the criteria for layoffs and also ensuring adequate talent remains to sustain day-to-day operations. The strategic workforce planning team and other HR and also business leaders need to get together and identify critical roles for the organization based on their current business needs to assess costs and also evaluate the difficulty of replacing those laid off employees. It's also very important to have a data-driven layoff strategy, which will ensure fairness in this process. The strategic workforce planning team should also help develop internal mobility plans to improve organizational agility and also maintain the operational efficiency of the organization. The second important step is really to communicate to all the employees that all other cost containment measures have been considered and that layoffs are not about their personal performance. So if both the downside victims and the survivors understand that their companies have exhausted other options before implementing layoffs, I think they're more likely to accept it. For example, in one of the sectors hit hardest by COVID-19, Marriott International found itself needing to close all the hotels, some hotels around the world. So many of you might have seen the video recorded by their CEO, Arne Sorensen, explaining the steps that organization had to take, including laying off 15,000 workers. But he also announced that his salary will be suspended and his executive pay reduced by 50%. I think this is a really good example of open, honest, and timely communication during the layoff period. And many executives and managers actually have never been trained on how to have difficult conversation, on how to appropriately and compassionately conduct layoffs, or how to counsel remaining employees. So they may not feel comfortable doing it, especially now that we are following the stay-at-home guidelines. So many layoff notifications actually have to be delivered virtually. For many managers, they may find it even more challenging. So the third suggestion is really to, before conducting layoffs, organizations should provide training for their HR and managers. Help HR and managers develop awareness of nonverbal behaviors and also enhance their listening and responding skills before they conduct layoffs. It's also helpful to provide them step-by-step guides, such as sample scripts and also responses to employees may have different reactions or emotions, so prepare different responses and to help prepare for those layoff notification meetings, as well as the conversations with those unaffected employees.
Another suggestion is to help employees find new opportunities. And many organizations are well positioned to help their laid off or their employees with reduced schedules find new opportunities. For example, some airlines and hospitality companies are partnering with companies that are hiring furiously in response to COVID-19, e.g. the technology, grocery stores, medical suppliers. For example, while American Airlines hasn't laid off employees, they've partnered with a number of employers to provide an expedited hiring process to assist their employees who are looking for new opportunities to supplement their income. And then to prevent permanent job losses, Hilton announced that it was furloughing many employees who would then receive benefits and then have access to more than 500,000 temporary jobs at more than 30 companies. Another really important suggestion is to demonstrate compassion to those who have been laid off. If anyone's been through that, a layoff, I know I have, it's one of the hardest things to go through. And so a personal touch from a manager and HR can help reduce the pain for employees who are laid off. Make sure you have a face-to-face conversation with each employee in a private setting and thoroughly explain the reason for the layoff. I mean, I've heard horror stories, people who've found out they were laid off by text, or a bunch of people were called into a meeting at the same time and everyone there in the meeting was told they were being laid off. And then the people who didn't go to the meeting didn't know. But so you need to have face-to-face conversations with employees. And you need to provide space for those laid off employees to express their emotions and then listen to their feelings and their needs with patience. One executive that I heard about was shocked after a layoff conversation when an employee asked if she could hug him because she was so grateful for the compassionate way in which he delivered that news. And unless there are legitimate security reasons, don't walk employees out of the building. Allow them to say goodbye to their coworkers and friends and leave the office with dignity. Most of us spend more of our waking hours at the office with our colleagues than we do with our own families. And so oftentimes employees have friends, and laying them off and escorting them out of the building doesn't provide them any dignity and doesn't allow them a chance to perhaps say goodbye. And then the last suggestion that we have is that organizations should provide financial, healthcare, and career assistance to those who have been laid off. While it's difficult, we suggest that organizations offer reasonably generous severance packages to all laid off employees, even those who have recently joined the company, because right now it's really hard to find a job. And without a severance package, it's possible that employees won't be able to financially make it until their unemployment comes. We also suggest, as mentioned earlier, that you provide information on unemployment benefits in your state. Extend your medical coverage for at least a month, especially during this medical crisis. I can't imagine a time where benefits are needed more than right now. And then to help employees alleviate their financial difficulties, you could think about doing what a U.S.-based manufacturing company is doing, because they're exploring foundations and funds that might provide additional financial assistance. Many restaurant owners and employees are creating GoFundMe pages to help support their laid-off coworkers. You've probably heard that many restaurants have stayed in business to try to provide food through delivery and takeout so that they don't have to close their doors and lay off all their employees. Another great suggestion is to offer outplacement services, conduct virtual job fairs with outside employers, and connect employees to company alumni, people who may have left your organization already, who may be able to help them transition to new jobs. So, Amy, do you have any final thoughts on how organizations can conduct compassionate layoffs?
Sure. I think one thing that I've noticed is that it seems that many organizations pay most of their attention to laid off employees, while those who survive from layoffs are often neglected in the process. So I think it's really important for organizations to care for and engage the remaining staff as well, really express empathy for those remaining employees, and also actively listen through pulse surveys and focus groups to help them overcome their survivor guilt. Organizations should also monitor the new workloads of those who have not been laid off. I think this is connected to what I just mentioned about strategic workforce planning, because remaining employees probably are not able to do the work of 2 or more employees for an extended period of time.
Amy, exactly. I couldn't agree more. My academic research in 2007 showed that talented layoff survivors won't stay at an organization once the economy rebounds if they've seen their former colleagues treated poorly, or if they've been made to feel or told that they're lucky to have a job during this difficult time. And this finding has played out since the Great Recession in 2008, because up until the end of 2019, we've had one of the tightest labor markets in U.S. history. It's been very difficult for companies to find workers. Granted, the recovery after the Great Recession was slow. Employment started going down in early 2008 and only started to grow again in 2010. But according to the C-Suite Challenge survey by the Conference Board, for the last few years, one of the top 5 concerns for CEOs globally has been attracting and retaining talent. So to retain your employees after the crisis, organizations need to find ways to persuade them to stay after the layoff. And the only ways they can do that is by making sure that their layoffs are fair, that they're providing generous severance packages for their laid off employees, and that they focus on employee engagement and experience. which, not surprisingly, is the topic of another report that we've written called Focusing on Employee Engagement in a Crisis. So you can find that on our website. And not surprisingly, that will be the topic of an upcoming podcast. So if you're interested, I hope you'll keep an eye out for that, or check out the human capital resources on the conference board's COVID-19 hub. So I hope you've enjoyed today's podcast and find some of the strategies to avoid layoffs or conduct them compassionately. Hope you found it helpful. And I would like to thank you all for joining us. If you would like to find out more, please visit our website at www.tcb.org/podcasts or /webcasts for more interactive programs. You can also find our podcasts on other platforms like iTunes or Spotify. Thanks again and goodbye.
This has been Insights from the Conference Board.